leave time for questions, hopefully. So, so the objectives, I'm not going to run through each of these one by one, but I'm going to do something a little bit different today. Obviously, I want to talk about kind of what's going on right now within the chronic kidney disease, the pre-end stage space, which is ever changing. But I also, and this is something unique that I haven't normally done, I've spoken on just overall plant-based nutrition separate from chronic kidney disease, but I want to give y'all just the overarching benefits of plant-based nutrition, because I think that a lot of dietitians, particularly renal dietitians, maybe not be very embedded into that world, into the plant-based world. And then we're going to move into why plant-based nutrition, particularly low protein plant-based nutrition, is so beneficial for this patient population. We'll talk about different watch outs and hopefully with a few case studies. So the current state of affairs is that we have a lot of work to do. So this was some research that I ran across with Wake Forest Baptist Health Network, and the scenario is that a lot of primary care physicians never refer to nephrologists. Only 45.4% of patients, they're actively seeking their primary care physician. They don't get referred to nephrology. And then if you look at the USRDS data, it's even worse than that. A lot of these primary care physicians aren't even doing the protein screening to catch kidney disease in diabetics and hypertensives. That rate is low at 43.2%. In 2017, a third of the incident end-stage renal disease patients received little to no pre-ESRD care, 80% of them starting with an indwelling catheter on dialysis. And I know if any of you work in dialysis, you've seen this firsthand. I certainly have. And the latest USRDS data estimates around 746,557 patients. And so why are we having, this was a question I asked myself when I was in the dialysis center, like, why are these dialysis centers popping up on every corner? Why aren't we doing something about this? Why are there so many prevalent ESRD cases? And so thankfully, Donald Trump put forth an initiative called Advancing American Kidney Health. And the first point in that is actually preventing progression to chronic kidney disease. And so I think we sit in a unique position because of this, because guess what? The treatment for this is diet for the most part. And so we could really be the unsung heroes in this. And so what about nutrition care? Well, we know that there's an independent association of pre-dialysis nutrition care for greater than 12 months. We see a lower risk of mortality when patients start dialysis. Now, the next data I have is the latest I've ever been able to find. I think this is better now. And if some of you out there have more current data, please send it my way. But from 2005 to 2007, 12% of patients received nutrition treatment from a dietitian, only 12%. 9% for 12 months or less, and 3% for 12 months or more. So what do those numbers tell us? They tell us that even if the slight chance that one of these patients seeks out and finds a dietitian, which we found that 80% are looking or wish they could find nutrition care, that they are only being seen late stage. If it's 12 months or less, gosh, they're probably stage 4 or 5. At that point, we're just trying to keep them off dialysis and maintain stability. But what if we could catch them at stage 2 or 3 and prevent them ever from even getting to that point in the first place? So now we're going to move into whole food plant-based nutrition. So this is going to be a bit of an overarching just quick rundown on plant-based nutrition, because I find that a lot of dietitians are just misinformed about this. Plant-based nutrition is highly evidence-based. In fact, T. Colin Campbell, who's one of my heroes, says that really the ball is in the other court. We have so much evidence behind this, which all of us have been trained to practice evidence-based nutrition, that it's really overwhelming. And then, you know, that goes with, there are some randomized control trials, but even epidemiology, and a lot of times we discard epidemiology saying, well, you know, causation, correlation does not equate with causation. But when it comes to nutrition studies, I think we've got to include epidemiology, because it's terribly hard to isolate somebody and isolate what they eat. But we can look at diet patterns in populations. We can look at diet patterns over years, and whole food plant-based nutrition comes out on top every single time. And so this is going to be a very mini research review. And so just bear with me through this. I'm just trying to give you evidence that when you are prescribing a plant-based diet for a chronic kidney disease patient, you are doing a good thing. You are helping so much more than just the chronic kidney disease, and it's a really big deal. So this is a paper, it's a nutritional update for physicians on plant-based diets. And basically it just goes through study after study. I'm talking about four big topics: obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and high blood pressure. Well, why does this matter to us? Well, I think if we could move back on the spectrum to obesity, diabetes, and high blood pressure, then maybe we wouldn't even have kidney disease to begin with. But we also know that chronic kidney disease patients die of heart disease, greater than 50% of those. And so, let me go back. When we look at obesity, this paper, Bernard and Burkow reviewed 87 published studies, and here's what they found about plant-based nutrition. A vegetarian diet or vegan diet is very effective for weight loss. They also found that vegetarian populations have lower rates of heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and obesity. In addition, their review suggests that weight loss in a vegetarian diet is not dependent on exercise, and that vegans and vegetarians lose on average 1 pound per week, which is what we typically recommend. They also found that people who eat plant-based foods, like plant-based meals, that calories are burned longer after the meal, whereas in contrast to a non-vegan or meat-based diet, they cause fewer calories to be burned because these calories are being stored as fat. Farmer and colleagues suggest that vegetarian diets may be better for weight management and may be more nutritious than diets including meat. So a lot of times we might recommend, well, we don't recommend, but a lot of times the fad diets out there that are recommended for weight loss, yeah, they might create weight loss, but what other problems do they create? There's a whole lot of ways to lose weight that aren't healthy. Vegetarians were also found to consume more magnesium, potassium, iron, thiamine, riboflavin, folate, vitamins, and less total fat. Now, I know in this population, sometimes we have to watch those minerals, but just overall showing you that a plant-based diet is very high in micronutrients. And I think that's something that most Americans miss these days. So with diabetes, the Adventist Health Studies, which I'm going to go over what that is on the next slide, found that vegetarians have approximately half the risk of developing diabetes than non-vegetarians. Vang and colleague reported that non-vegetarians were 74% more likely to develop diabetes over a 17-year period than vegetarians. Heart disease. The Lifestyle Heart Trials was included in this update, and that's the Dean Ornish trial. Some of you may have heard of that before, but in that trial, 82% of patients with diagnosed heart disease following this plant-based program showed some level of regression of atherosclerosis, meaning that it got better. The Lion Heart Study is a big study that was a prospective randomized secondary prevention trial. And it found that the intervention group, the one on the plant-based diet, experienced 73% decrease in coronary events and 70% decrease in all-cause mortality. And they attributed this to more plants, less meat. And then the last, hypertension. In 2010, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee performed a literature review identifying articles examining the effect of dietary patterns on blood pressure in adults. Vegetarian diets were associated with lower diastolic and systolic blood pressure. There was also a randomized controlled trial on a Japanese diet, which is low sodium plant-based, and it showed the same thing. So, go back this way. Another group of studies, this is really interesting, and if you're not familiar with the Adventist Health Studies, they're really cool. The Seventh-day Adventists are located in the United States, mostly in Loma Linda, California. There's a lot of them there. And interestingly, you'll hear I'm going to talk about blue zones, but the only blue zone in the United States is actually in Loma Linda, California. Why is this? Well, the Seventh-day Adventists, their religion promotes a plant-based diet. But what makes them a wonderful study population is that they also promote no smoking, no drinking, no caffeine. So you're removing all those confounders that take away from the diet. So they can compare these, like the Seventh-day Adventists who eat plant-based against the Seventh-day Adventists who don't eat plant-based, or against Mormons who also have some of the same, like no caffeine, or I'm not sure exactly what their recommendations are, but they also remove those confounders. And so what did they find from these Adventist health studies? So there's the mortality study, the Adventist Health Study 1, 2, and there's even one going on right now. So these began back in 1960, the Adventist mortality study. And I'm just going to go through a few of the findings. And these are robust studies too. Like this one included 22,940 California Adventists. This was more of a mortality study. So they looked at death rates from all cancers and was lower, 40% lower for Adventist men and 24% lower in Adventist women. Lung cancer, 79% lower. Colorectal cancer, 39% lower. Breast cancer, 39% lower. Coronary heart disease, 34% lower for Adventist men and 2% lower for Adventist women. The Adventist Health Study 1 and 2, both of those were more on trying to find out what components of their lifestyle protect against disease. But here's a few related with diet. Eating legumes was protective against colon cancer. Mind you, legumes are carbs. Eating nuts several times a week reduces the risk of heart attack by up to 50%. Men who had a high consumption of tomatoes reduced their prostate cancer risk by 40%, and drinking soy milk more than once daily reduced prostate cancer by 70%. And then also there was some renal mortality data in some of these, and it showed that in men, vegetarians had a reduced risk of renal mortality and endocrine mortality, and though not statistically significant, the women showed the same. What is it? Okay. The China study. This is a book I highly recommend all dietitians read, and you can actually, there's an online, I cannot remember, maybe, is it Helm Publishing? I can't remember, but I get the little brochure in the mail, and if you read this, you can get CEUs. But this is, the China study is a book about the China Project. So the China Project was not based on one study alone. They say this is the most robust nutritional study ever performed. It was across 65 counties in China, 6,500 adults, and there were 8,000 statistically significant associations between diet and disease. And basically, one of the main things is that animal protein and plant protein act very differently within the body. Animal protein is most sufficient at growing cells, okay? But that's all cells. So we know that animal protein will increase insulin-like growth factor 1. When we're adults, we're not growing anymore. So we don't want a high level of insulin-like growth factor 1 because it also causes cancer cells to grow. And then another whole food plant-based diet is demonstrably beneficial for a variety of diseases, which I'm showing you now: heart disease, cancer, kidney disease. And then the last just rundown on my soapbox on plant-based nutrition is just talking about the blue zones. And this is another really interesting aspect. If you haven't studied as a dietitian, it's pretty cool. But there are only 5 blue zones. There's only one in America, which I told you was Loma Linda, California. Every last one of these blue zones eats a primarily plant-based diet. They're not all vegan, but they eat primarily plant-based. These are the longest, they live the longest, but they don't just live long and end up in, incapacitated in a nursing home like a lot of Americans do. These people live a long time and they're still active and functioning, and they have the highest percentage of centenarians. That's somebody who lives to be 100 or greater than any other places in the world. Okay. And so the issue that we have, and a lot of the reasons that I'm going through all that is because a lot of times dietitians see a plant-based diet as a deficient diet for some reason, when it's really, it's higher in micronutrients. A standard American diet is higher in macronutrients. And so people are always worried about, oh, aren't you going to become protein malnourished? Well, protein malnutrition is the picture on the left. That's kwashiorkor. I've never seen that in the United States. However, on the right, I have seen that every day of my life when I go out in public in the United States. And so the problem we have is not a macronutrient deficiency. The problem we have is a micronutrient deficiency. And the picture on the right is what starts the process for diabetes, for high blood pressure, for kidney disease. So what are we doing about that? Well, if a patient ends up with kidney damage, now we're going to move more into the kidney arena. What we want to do is put them on a low protein plant-based diet. And why in the world do we want to do that? Well, we want to decrease nitrogenous waste. Remember that the only macronutrient that has nitrogen is protein. And so we want to decrease that, which then, because the kidneys have to filter out this nitrogenous waste, that will lessen the kidney load. That will give the kidneys a rest, because if you've got kidneys that are damaged, you don't want to keep driving those kidneys. If you think about it, if you had an old car, you don't want to drive it from Mississippi, where I am, out to California, because you're going to run it in the ground. You want that car to rest. And then also to lower intraglomerular pressure. So it's been known for decades that protein-rich foods result in dilatation of the afferent arterioles of the glomerulus, which leads to intraglomerular pressure and an increase in GFR. So an acute increase in GFR, that's fine. You don't want a chronic elevated GFR. That's telling you that you're chronically driving those kidneys to work harder and harder. And so this is basically just kind of I'm just giving you a review of how protein is broken down in the body, but you know that we have protein from two sources. We either eat protein or we have endogenous breakdown of proteins. And so when we break these down, it's a process called deamination. And that just means that when in the liver removes the amino group, the NH2. The NH2, the liver converts this NH2 to highly toxic NH4, which is ammonia. The body does not like highly toxic ammonia, so what does it do? It goes through the urea cycle, which forms urine, and then the kidneys have to go ahead and get rid of that urine. And so before, there was a dialysis center on every corner. Guess what the treatment of choice was? It was a low protein diet. That's all we had. Remember the Entitlement Act of 1970 in the 1970s, where that is what provided everyone access to dialysis. Before that, we had to treat these patients with diet. That was it. People couldn't afford dialysis. It wasn't readily available. And that's even seen in certain countries. We'll take India, for example. India has a higher right now burden of diabetes and hypertension. Maybe a lot of those countries are adopting our diet, which is not a good thing. But because of the diabetes and hypertension, CKD is on the rise now in India. Sadly, fewer than 10% of these people can get dialysis due to limited availability and excessive costs over there. And so there were two researchers, their names were Shah and Patel. And what they did was they decided they were going to revisit low protein diets. And so they included 29 of their stable stage 5 patients. 14 agreed to follow a supplemented low protein diet, which we'll talk about what that is, and 15 did not. So they served as the control group. And what they noticed was that creatinine clearance decline rate for the treatment group was 0.09 milliliters per minute per month and 0.3 milliliters per minute per month in the control group. So that demonstrated the preservative nature of dropping the protein intake in these patients. So why is every patient not prescribed a low protein diet? Now, I do think this is getting better, but it has not been better in the last few years. And the reason is because this trial from a while back from the MDRD trial, but this has persisted over the years. And the MDRD trial, I normally go through the whole MDRD with you, but what I'm going to tell you, because I feel like this is changing, I'm not going to go through all that. But the MDRD trial basically said that diet has no impact on progression of chronic kidney disease. We know that's not true. And so part of the reason that the MDRD trial says this is because, or the problems with the MDRD trial are shown on the right, that it was based on prescribed protein intake rather than actual protein intake. And we all know that sometimes we prescribe something for a patient and they don't always do that. Enrolled patients did not have to exhibit evidence of progressive renal failure, where if you're going to be looking at if it helps progression of renal failure, they need to have progressive renal failure. This third point, I don't know that I agree with, because I think that does help polycystic kidney disease, but what they stated was that polycystic kidney disease is unaffected by nutrition interventions, and around 20% of these patients had polycystic kidneys. ACE inhibitors can mask the benefits of diet, which is true, and these patients were being treated with ACE inhibitors in an ununiform, unregulated fashion. So then that is a huge confounder, trying to figure out if it's the ACE or if it's the diet. And then a rapid decline in GFR in study A was followed by a slower progression. So that really the study needed to be longer to tell if there was actually a benefit. And so now there's been secondary analysis of this. And what they showed was that a decrease in the intake of protein from 0.9 down to 0.6 grams per kilogram per day showed a 33% deceleration in progression. For every 0.2 grams per kilogram per body weight per day, there's a corresponding 29% lower rate of decline. And so this is why I didn't go through all of the whole MDRD trial, because in 2020, thankfully, the KDOQI guidelines came out and they actually support lower protein nutrition for these patients, which I was so excited. But so these are the recommendations now. Stage 1 and 2 is pretty normal. But if you look at stage 3 through 5, they're going to either recommend 0.55 to 0.6 or as low as 0.28 to 0.43. If you drop that low, yes, that is. So a normal, just a plant-based diet will get you to the low protein of 0.5 to 0.6 for the most part of absorbable protein. That is sufficient. They're not going to become protein malnourished on that. But if you drop lower than that, they will. And so what do we do with that? Well, we supplement with keto analogs of amino acids to meet the protein requirement and also to scavenge excess protein, which we'll talk about how keto analogs work. Okay, so we've talked about low protein. Now we want to talk about why this plant-based nutrition that I went over at the beginning of this is beneficial for these patients, because the type of protein does matter. The University of Utah School of Medicine states that for every 33% increase of plant protein in a CKD patient's diet, a 23% lower risk of mortality ensues. So here's what I love about this. You're not just putting them on a plant-based diet and now you're causing all these other problems. Because a lot of times some of the therapeutic diets that we use can kind of cause other problems. And a lot of what we do is a trade-off. You know, in dialysis, sometimes foods that are healthy for people whose kidneys work are not healthy in dialysis, but that's the best we can do because we are prioritizing other things. But here, you know, for the most part, especially if they're stage 3, a plant-based diet, not only is it going to help with the kidney disease, gosh, it helps with diabetes, it helps with high blood pressure, it helps with heart disease. So there, you're going to see that 23% lower risk of mortality. And so why plants? Well, we want to give the kidneys a functional kidney rest. It helps with acidosis, it helps with inflammation, it helps with gut health. And these are just a few. I'm not going into all the comorbidities, but these are the ones I really want to highlight today. So if we're talking about a functional rest, this is a really old slide, but I use it every time because I love it. And it shows, it almost reminds me of like if you're looking at blood glucose or something like that. But if you see after a meat load, after a meat meal, do you see what the GFR does? Do you see that the kidneys are working harder? But after a soy protein load, they're not. I'm not advocating soy protein. I'm just showing you the difference between plant and meat. I'm not advocating it either, but and then if we look at acidosis, so a normal serum bicarbonate is less than 22 milliequivalents per liter. However, this is the clinical definition. There is research that shows that acid retention can occur even when these serum bicarbonate levels in this are normal. So the body does this a lot. You may find a normal serum level, but other things could be going on outside the body. So a great example of this is like calcium in dialysis. The serum level could be normal, but that tells you absolutely nothing about what's going on in the soft tissues. So it's kind of the same thing with acidosis. You can be having acidosis in the tubules of the kidneys, but it not show up in the serum. And so what about kidneys with acid-base balance? Well, the kidneys neutralize net acid load. We know this by reabsorbing the filtered bicarbonate if the body needs it and synthesizing bicarbonate. So we know if the kidneys are failing, they're not doing this as well. Acidosis occurs due to impaired ammonia excretion, reduced tubular reabsorption, which we just said, and insufficient bicarbonate production. So all that kind of makes a full circle. So why do we care if the patient is acidotic? Well, there is an increased degradation of muscle protein and muscle wasting. We don't want these patients with muscle wasting, especially as some of them are older Americans. Destruction of bone and bone disease. When I'm reading some of these things, also think about your dialysis patient, and maybe, you know, they may not be able to be completely plant-based, but what if we increase the plants in their diet? Would that help? Probably so. You know, a lot of times I think we rely on the dialysis machine to correct the acidosis, but would a change in diet also be beneficial? We rely on the dialysis machine to remove potassium, but we still restrict potassium in the diet. So I do think that this would help. Decreased albumin synthesis, again, that would probably help both areas, dialysis and CKD. Increased rate of progression of CKD. So the serum bicarbonate concentration is regarded as an independent predictor of CKD progression. That's the very thing we're trying to prevent. Stimulation of inflammation and impaired insulin secretion and responsiveness, which we don't want if we have a diabetic. And so diet and acidosis. So the diet plays a huge role in acidosis. Fruits and vegetables are naturally alkalizing, and meat and dairy are high in these sulfur-containing amino acids, and so they produce these high excessive acid loads. Net endogenous production depends on the amount and type of protein intake. Low protein, high fruit and vegetable intake has the lowest net acid production. And so there was this really cool study in 2012 where they took stage 2 CKD patients, which is pretty early on in the process, but they either gave them a sodium bicarbonate supplement or they simply increased the number of fruits and vegetables in the diet. And both treatments were intended to lower acid in the patient's bodies. And results showed that not only were the patient's bodies more alkaline on both, but that the ones who were eating the plant-based diet had the indicators of kidney injury were actually lower in the fruit and vegetable group. Again, going back to this isn't just accomplishing one thing of slowing the progression of chronic kidney disease. Now we know that it helps acidosis and it slows the damage markers of kidney disease. So how do you kind of translate this into the actual food that someone eats? Well, the potential renal acid load is a great way to do this. So this indicates the calculated acid forming potential of certain foods or the base forming potential of certain foods. And so if you have a negative value, then it's an alkaline producing food. And remember, it doesn't matter if the food, it's not what the food is outside of the body, if it's acid or alkaline, like if it's a citrus fruit, if it's acid outside the body. What matters is when the food is taken into the body and digested, what does it do? Well, fruits and vegetables have a negative value, meaning they're alkaline forming. But if you look at all these, look at meat, look at fish, eggs, cheese, all these are very acid forming. So if we remove these from the diet, then we've got the patient on a more alkaline diet, which improves their health and slows the progression of chronic kidney disease. Okay, what about inflammation? Why should I be worried about inflammation? Dialysis is inflammatory, kidney disease is inflammatory. Let's not contribute more. And so when we talk about chronic kidney disease, we know that there's this persistent low-grade inflammation in these patients, really at all stages. And so just to review, I always like to kind of liken inflammation to if you cut an apple and it turns brown, or rusting, that's oxidation. It's producing oxidants or free radicals. And so what do we want if there's an oxidant? We want antioxidants. Where do we find antioxidants? We find those in fruits and vegetables. And also just knowing the impact, we know that albumin is a marker, it's an acute phase protein, and it's a marker of inflammation, which I think is why it's so just associated with mortality rates. And so this is just a little, I love this slide. It's just showing, reminding you how this all works. So a free radical is missing that electron in the outer shell, and the antioxidant gives it the free radical, an electron to stabilize that cell. If you don't stabilize that cell, it continues to damage other cells because it goes around stealing electrons from other cells, and you can eventually end up with DNA damage. And so how does this translate into food? Well, we can look at ORAC values. Now, what is an ORAC value? I want to say this with an ORAC value is done in vitro. It is not in vivo. So if something's done in vitro, I like to pair it with something else, because in vitro does not necessarily translate into the body. The same like when we talk about like medications that were in vitro. Binding capacity is one example of this. That's in vitro. So ORAC values are done in a test tube. So what it does, this is the process. It's a lab test that attempts to quantify the total antioxidant capacity of a food by placing a sample of the food in the test tube, along with certain molecules that generate free radical activity and certain other molecules that are vulnerable to oxidation. And they measure how well the sample protected those vulnerable molecules from that free radical. So that's basically what it is. And so I guess like when we talk about this, then we can pair it with, say, epidemiological research. Well, these people who are eating these plant-based diets have less of these inflammatory markers that cause these chronic diseases. So that's kind of what I'm saying to pair it with. Also, the thing I like about an ORAC value is that it's looking at the total ability of that food to protect against oxidation. It's not just pulling out, say, vitamin C. And the reason I like that is because I think as dietitians, sometimes we get very reductionist in our thinking. We think, well, are you going to get enough vitamin C? Are you going to get enough protein? Well, that's very reductionist, because remember, food and orange has so many things in there, and those things work synergistically. And there are things in fruits and vegetables, there are phytochemicals that researchers say we haven't even discovered yet. It's a synergistic process, and food patterns are super important. Because we know that our bodies react to different foods in different ways every day. So that's another reason I really like ORAC values. But if you look at the ORAC value, look at acai, look how high the ORAC value is. And then even, it's really interesting to look at certain spices or herbs. Look at how high dried oregano is. But now let's go down here into the animal products. And they're super low. It's because they don't contain the antioxidants at the levels that we want or need. So Joel Furman, who I really love, he talks about eating plant-based nutrition as a nutritarian diet. So there are way more nutrients per calorie in a plant-based diet. Okay, another benefit. So now we're looking at phosphorus, and we all know that plant-based phosphorus is less bioavailable than, we talk about organic and inorganic phosphorus, but the one thing that I want you to know is that plant-based phosphorus is actually less bioavailable than even natural flesh foods. So yes, organic and inorganic is important, but flesh food is also much higher in phosphorus. Also remember that meat is injected with phosphorus additives, so vegetables are not. And then research has shown that FGF23 is higher in meat-eating subjects. Why does this matter? Well, we don't draw, I've never seen an FGF23 drawn on a pre-end stage patient, but we do know it's going on in the background. A lot of times we don't see a high phosphorus in these patients. And the reason is because FGF23 is rising in the background. It's a phosphatoric hormone. It's causing the patient to urinate out the phosphorus. But the problem is, as FGF23 goes up, so does heart disease and and risk of heart failure. So FGF23, let's see, I have a different slide here. FGF23, so this is a study, it was a crossover trial. And basically what they did was they put people on a meat-rich diet for a week and then alternated with the vegetarian diet. So the vegetarians still had 5% of protein coming from animal sources, but here's what they noticed. The phosphorus in these two diets were exactly the same, the phosphorus level. So this is showing you that you're going to absorb less from a plant-based diet, and also the FGF23 was 40% lower in the plant-based group. Okay. Now we're moving on to the gut. So what does the gut have to do with the kidneys? Well, a lot, and I think we don't even know how much it has to do with the kidneys. The gut microbiome or microbiota is a new area of research, but there's just so much happening in this space. But basically, it's all the bacteria, virus. I tell my kids all the little bugs in your tummy and on your body as well. But they influence our physiology, and I think they influence more. I mean, some people call it another organ. And it's super exciting, but it is new and it does affect kidney health. So I'm just going to show you one way. But if a patient has impaired renal function, then they're going to have more nitrogenous toxins in the large intestine. One of those that we need to talk about is TMAO. So this is a gut-derived amine oxide that has been implicated in the causation of cardiovascular disease, and it's cleared by the kidney. If the kidneys aren't clearing this well, then we know we've got a problem. But I'm just going to highlight a few things about TMAO. TMAO is trimethylamine N oxide. TMAO is the body creates it via the gut bacteria, help create this, post-consumption of animal products. The bacteria convert choline and carnitine in animal products found in foods such as meat and eggs and cheese into atherosclerosis, producing TMAO. TMAO fosters the capability of inflammatory cells in atherosclerotic plaque in the walls of arteries to attach to LDL cholesterol. However, it not only affects a CKD patient regarding increased risk of cardiovascular disease, it contributes to worsening kidney failure, which continues the cycle of increased cardiovascular disease and so on, because we know kidney failure contributes to cardiovascular disease. Interestingly, those who eat a plant-based diet possess a gut microbiome that will not convert choline and carnitine to TMAO, even if they were fed a steak. So what are the typical reservations? And what I typically find is the very low protein diet. People are concerned about this, and you know, you have to be careful with this. And this is, I always reserve this for late stage patients because it's very challenging to drop the protein level that low, especially if the patient is of normal weight. To keep the calories up and the protein down is a major challenge, which I'm not paid by Dr. Shara, but the Flavus, the low protein grain products that they have, they're imperative with this diet. I mean, I'm constantly recommending these products, but they also, I'm not a big meal plan person overall. I feel like a lot of times we spend all these time writing meal plans and then they don't follow them, but this group probably needs a meal plan, at least a few sample days to see, like, what does this even look like? They also probably will need a log, which I don't love, just for the general population, but it's a challenge. And then you must add the keto analogs. And I'll show y'all the 2 brands of keto analogs that you can get in the United States, but Ketorina, if you go to their site, they have a dosing page there that tells you how to dose it for your patient. So let's talk about keto analogs really quick. They obviously, we've talked about that they'll help preserve nutrition status, but they also, keto analogs are missing nitrogen. So what they'll do is they'll alleviate uremia by capturing the nitrogen residues and utilizing them to produce more amino acids. So if you know in your body, you know, you've got this amino acid pool, and so you pull from those amino acids to make whatever proteins that you need, which is why I hate also the term HBV protein. Protein is amino acids, and you break protein down into amino acids to build other proteins, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, these keto analogs can scavenge, when you break them down, the nitrogen residues. They can scavenge those nitrogen residues because they need the nitrogen. So it stimulates protein synthesis, inhibits protein degradation, decreases proteinuria, and will not induce hyperfiltration on the kidneys like an intact protein, or raising the dietary protein will. So phosphorus, we've already talked about the phosphorus injections. So if you have any concerns about that, the best route is a plant-based diet, because like we said, it's less absorbable and it's not injected with additives. The wrong spot. Okay. Do I need to worry about potassium? So this is a watch out, but here's what I find with patients is that they find out that they have kidney disease, and then they go out on the website and they start trying to find diet information. And what they find there is information for dialysis patients, and we all know that that's totally different. And so they over restrict potassium, and then they find themselves feeling like they have absolutely nothing to eat, or they'll over restrict potassium and increase animal protein, thinking they're doing a good thing. But we know that potassium, the guidelines for pre-end stage is to follow the lab. For dialysis, obviously, you know, that is definitely a restriction. And then sometimes, you know, when you get to later stage CKD, yes, that can be an issue. I watch it pretty close if I have a late stage patient, especially if you look at their medications, if their medications cause potassium sparing. Meat is also, if you didn't know it, is also enhanced with potassium additives. And they've done, Nori, Kalantar, and Kavetsky looked at some research asking dialysis patients about their diets. And they found that the top 10 sources of dietary potassium in a dialysis patient, which you can imagine translates forward unless they're working with a dietitian into a CKD patient. This is what it includes: beef, chicken, Mexican food, hamburgers, and then way down the list, we find legumes, fruit, real fruit juices, potatoes, and then cheeseburgers and canned fruit. So everybody wants to jump on plants for potassium. Well, that's not the main source. And I can promise you, unless somebody's working with a dietitian, they're not out eating a lot of plants for the most part. Fruits and vegetables do not have potassium additives. They think that the high fiber content and increased transit time can also result in less absorption, but you do need to consider potassium, especially with the medications. So this is just a kind of comparison between meat and plant levels of potassium. And then also remember there's lots of non-nutritional causes of hyperkalemia, so be sure to look into everything. How am I doing on time? Doing good. All right, how are we going to do this? Well, this is in my book. This is I know that dietitians love a protocol, and so this is just a framework on working with a CKD patient with plant-based nutrition. Let me reinforce that. It's a framework. So one of my doctors that early in my career in dialysis told me that, Jennifer, a monkey can follow a protocol. Use your brain is what he said. And so always use your brain when it comes to working with these patients. Remember, there are trade-offs. You know, one that a friend of mine, she may be on this call, we talk about, like, I'm not a big fan of a lot of added oil in the diet. However, if I've got a chronic kidney disease stage 4 or 5 patient that's underweight and I've got to boost up calories, I'm probably going to add some fat in there. So is that the norm? No, but I'm going to use my brain and I'm going to do trade-offs when necessary. But this is a good guideline. Here are the keto analogs. You got Ketorina and you've got Albutrix. They have different minerals attached to those, and you can make a clinical decision which one you like best. Low potassium fruits and vegetables, we know they exist out there. So if the patient gets late stage and they need help with this, you know, there's handouts on low potassium fruits and vegetables out there that you can use to help educate your patients. Interestingly, it seems like patients that are educated by their physician in a doctor's office, this is what they receive. They don't receive anything about protein or any of the other parts of their diet. They just get a list of low potassium foods and sent along their way and told to limit salt, which I also recommend limiting salt. Eating out. So a lot of our patients eat out. In fact, a lot of America eats out. And so it's the purple cow on the left is really neat. This is something I use because I eat a plant-based diet myself. It's called Happy Cow, and you can get this app on your phone, and you hit the app and you say, see everything nearby, and it'll pop up every restaurant around you at that time that has plant-based options. Many times if I find myself somewhere rural, it may say no options. So then what do? Well, you can always go to different delis. They usually have soups and salads. They're ethnic foods like Asian food and Mexican food and Indian food. Those are naturally usually have plant-based options. And then interestingly, on the bottom, Logan's Roadhouse, that's actually a steakhouse. So why am I saying that? Well, steakhouses have sides, and they usually have a long list of sides. So that's one, like Logan's Roadhouse is a steakhouse, but if I'm on the road somewhere and I need to stop to eat, this is one of the places I would go because I can order their sides. They have sweet potatoes and broccoli and all sorts of things. So eating out is definitely a possibility. They just may need a little guidance. Again, I'm not paid by this company, but I do recommend these products, and especially for those later stage patients. They're really super helpful. This is a probiotic designed for kidney patients. I also recommend this a lot. Again, I'm not paid by them, but I do recommend this a lot for my patients. They have pretty good data on this, and I actually met the physician that helped create this, and I just think the microbiome, I think this is an area that's going to grow. It may even be, you know, as robust as improving and changing the way that we treat chronic kidney disease. Okay, so let's talk about some case studies. I'll do this for about 5 more minutes and then I'll stop wherever I am. I should be able to get through all of this. So this was my first patient, and these are in the book too. I tell the story, but this was one of my first patients that I began to work with, and I started with him right here in March, and you can see that his GFR was 15, and his son heard me speak. And he said, I'd really like for you to work with my dad. This man was in his 80s. He would never change his diet ever before this time. But he didn't want to end up on dialysis. And so at that point, he was willing. And so what I would tell you with this is meet the patient where they are and be their biggest cheerleader, because you don't know, even if they haven't done it or not been willing to change their diet. And we know that as dietitians, I mean, what people eat, gosh, it's a huge deal to people. They are really embedded in what they eat. And so he changed his diet completely. So never give up on someone. But what he did, he switched to a completely plant-based, low-protein diet. And he told his doctors wanted to start dialysis. He said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to work with this girl I found, which was me. And you see, look at how his GFR just goes up, 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 up. Now, at this time, this was, gosh, back in 2010, we didn't have keto analogs in the United States. They were available in Germany, but not here. And so I just had to do amino acids. That's all I could do. And it was just the best I could do. So I did a plant-based version of an amino acid. And you see that he went up. Now, you can see he kind of went up, down, up, down, up, down. And I had to, stay on him about, well, you can't increase, your bean intake too high, because even when they get this far, even plant-based proteins, I still do that very low protein diet, which again is a challenge. But we knew that his kidneys would eventually fail, and they did. However, whenever I was in the dialysis center and I got new patients, their albumin was usually in the tank. I mean, down in the twos. And so this shows you how important it is for these patients to work with the dietitian. Look at his albumin. And even when he initiated dialysis, it was 3.5. I'll take that in a dialysis center with a new patient. And so, that's the other thing. I had a dietitian ask me the other day. She was all just hung up on this, the protein intake and HBV protein and all of this. And the problem is you get yourself in a real kind of a cycle of failure. And actually I saw this on the Renal RD Facebook page, but on the Renal RD Facebook page, the dietitian was saying her patient had completely lost their appetite, and she couldn't get them to eat anything. And so I immediately say, well, are they eating meat? And they weren't eating a plant-based diet. And so what's happening? Well, the uremic toxins are going up. What happens when uremic toxins go up? They lose their appetite. This man never lost his appetite. Nobody I've ever worked with that stuck with a plant-based diet lost their appetite because their uremic toxins just were lower. It doesn't get into that. I never see them get that metallic taste that patients complain about. And so he entered well-nourished on a plant-based diet. And I really wanted to follow him back then because this was the first time I had ever done this. And I wanted to see, I had a theory. I thought this would work. I had read Mackenzie Walzer's book. I felt like it would work. Well, it did. And so then I call this one my greatest success story, but she came to me. Her daughter had reached out to a dialysis dietitian who didn't really know how to care for a CKD. And so the dialysis dietitian referred her to me. And she came to me and she had found out her doctor, she kept asking her doctor for diet information, never would refer her to anybody, probably didn't know who to refer her to. So I think as dietitians, we've got to improve that. But the way she found out she had CKD stage 3, he never told her. He didn't say hey, you've got chronic kidney disease stage 3. He walked out of the room at one of her appointments and she looked up on the computer screen. He had left her EMR up and she saw it there. So anyway, she found me. She was all upset. Her GFR, you see how low it was here. We began to work together. And so I would tell her, listen, we're slowly creeping up. And I said, every time you get lab, I want you to come back and see me and let's talk. And so, we kept doing that. We stayed in contact. And I was seeing her at this point, I was seeing patients. I wasn't charging them a dime. I just wanted their data, just to see, kind of the results I would get. Well, she had gone to, she was meeting me for her appointment. She said, let me run by my nephrology office and I'm going to go pick up my lab. And so she went and picked up her lab. She had an envelope. She showed up and she opened up her envelope and her GFR had gone up into the 70s. And she just looked at me and she said, my gosh, Jennifer, you've saved my life. And I can tell you as a dietitian, I have never had a moment more rewarding than that one in all of my career, because instead of just managing a disease, I was actually improving it. And that is very rewarding. And so she got so much better that her nephrologist said he wanted to discharge her. He didn't even need to see her anymore. So in summary, I want to summarize the chronic renal insufficiency cohort, 2,938 participants, multi-center, multi-ethnic. And this is what they found. A greater percentage of plant protein associates with lower FGF, higher serum bicarb, which is less acidosis. A greater percentage of plant protein is not associated with high potassium, low albumin, or low hemoglobin. And so I like to summarize with this again to reinforce the sufficiency of a plant-based diet, the efficiency of a plant-based diet to treat chronic kidney disease, and to encourage you that this diet is more than just, you know, something that we implement as a secondary treatment or whatever. That this is a treatment. This is diet as medicine. This helps these patients stay away from dialysis. And so I hope you'll see it that way. And I encourage you, if you don't work with pre-end stage, we need more dietitians in this space, and I hope that you will. This is the book. It's available on Amazon. And I think I am now to questions.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It's so helpful. I think especially, you know, your experience with patients, the case studies are really, really inspiring. We have a few questions. I'll just kind of read them off. So the first one is from Vicky. She's asking, for overweight or obese, do we use their actual body weight?
For overweight or obese, do you use their actual body weight? I typically don't. I'll adjust it. I think a lot, to me, okay, some of y'all may probably disagree, and this is can be a touchy subject for dietitians, but the health at every size, I'm not saying that we fat shame. I'm saying that we work with someone that's overweight, because that is not a healthy state. It's inflammatory, actually. So I would use an adjusted body weight and try to get them to lose weight, because I don't believe in health at every size. So that's me. But you know, if you ask 10 dietitians, they'll probably give you 10 different answers on that. But that's what I do. And then I like to look at weight patterns with these patients. I like to say, you know, how long have you been at this weight, and what is the lowest weight you've been? Because if somebody's, you know, if their ideal weight's 125 pounds and they hadn't seen that since high school, they're probably not going to see that. So I try to get to a reasonable weight, and, you know, adjusting it, I think, helps do that.
Okay, great. Someone's asking if you know if keto analogs are available in Canada.
Oh gosh, I don't know. Probably. Okay, so let me tell you another company. Look at Fresenius Kabi. It's available over in Europe, and I actually am working with a patient. She read my book and wanted help in Germany, and she uses Fresenius Kabi. She uses their keto analogs. So check Fresenius Kabi, and also check Ketorina and Albutrix. And if it's not available, ask them to make it available.
Okay. Oh, actually, someone's asking if you can put the picture of your book on again. Would you mind doing that so everyone can see it? Perfect. All right. Okay. Keto analogs, are these prescribed by the nephrologist, or are they over the counter? Could you please provide info on how to get them?
Yeah. So no, you don't have to wait for the nephrologist to do it. In fact, they won't do it. They probably don't even know what they are. You can do it. So if you go to just Google both keto analogs, I'm not sure about if Albutrix has the dosing, but the guy who makes the Albutrix is Lee Hull, and he has a book called Stopping Kidney Disease. I believe that's the name of it. I hope I said it right. But it may say it in that book. But Ketorina on their site has really particular guidance on how to dose it and how to titrate it up. Also, they actually have a dietitian on staff. So if you ever had questions, you can call her. And even I've spoken with the owner of that company, and he'll help you. So I would definitely say go out to that website, and it helps with all the dosing. But you can do it straight. I mean, I do it. I just send them, I tell them how much to take, and I send them to the website to order.
Great. Okay. How much do we have to restrict potassium and phosphorus? I think this is a common question.
Yeah. So if they're early stage, just follow the lab. Phosphorus, if you just have them on plant-based phosphorus, that is the restriction. They're not, you don't have to restrict further than that. They do still have some residual renal function in this population. but you do want to, and well, and when I'm talking about a plant-based diet, I'm talking about whole foods. So naturally, if they're on a whole food plant-based diet, not all this processed package with all the inorganic phosphorus, plant-based phosphorus is going to be less absorbed, so that will be the restriction. Potassium, what you're going to need to do if they're late stages, you've got to watch those labs closely. If I have, I actually wrote a case study for some dietitians. It wasn't a real patient, but I wrote a case study, and I said, I had the patient come to me the first time, the fake patient come to me the first time and say the potassium was 4.3, and then it went up to like 5. And I said, is this an issue? Do you need to withdraw it? Even though it's normal, yes, it's an issue because it shot up so much over a period. And so just when they get to later stage, always monitor it. But if they get to the later stages, then what I do is I just look at their diet. If you tell somebody only eat this many, milligrams or whatever of a mineral, they function more in food. So I get diet records. My late stage patients, I'll get 3-day diet records and labs on them very consistently. And I may say, okay, you need to remove the tomatoes if your potassium's high, like if I get a high lab, and then I tell them go back and have that redrawn, because it also goes around the medications. So know which medications are potassium sparing. That's going to be a diuretic, certain diuretics, and the ACE and ARBs can be raise potassium levels. So know your medications, know the stage of kidney disease, and monitor and adjust the diet accordingly late stage.
Yeah, great. Okay, someone's asking about fluids. How do we calculate the restriction other than 1,000 plus urine output? So that's more of a dialysis question. Yeah.
That's dialysis. We don't have a fluid restriction.
Right.
Unless the doctor makes some kind of restriction because of something else going on pre-end stage. Be sure not to cross the indication. We're not talking about ESRD. Those patients' kidneys have failed. We're talking about chronic kidney disease. Their kidneys are still working some. I don't restrict fluid unless the physician, I have had one patient one time that the physician restricted the fluid, but as a rule, I don't do that.
Right. Okay, and then someone's asking about Renadil, $72 a month. Are other probiotics almost as helpful? What about prebiotics?
Prebiotics come from food for the most part, fiber. If they're eating a whole food plant-based diet, they're going to be getting tons of prebiotics. If they can't afford the Renadil, because it is high, gosh, I just saw somebody recommend another probiotic the other day. You could look at the which strains are in the Renadil and try to find something cheaper that would be almost comparable. I've never done that before, but that's a really good point that you could do that. You could look at the strains. And then, you could have them eat things like sauerkraut if they'll do that. I don't know if they will. I eat sauerkraut and fermented foods, but they may not do that. So I don't think it's a game, it's just a game ender if they can't get the Renadil. But I do think it's a nice tool we can have, especially in those late stage where, if a lot of times the later stage, they want to see that improvement too. They want to see that GFR get better. A whole lot of times it's not going to. We just want to hold it stable. And so, for that little to try to push it to get better, if that patient's really motivated, then they may be willing to pay for that Renadil. I've had a lot of patients that are willing to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. And this is a question for me. What strategies do you see best to kind of convince a resistant patient that a plant-based diet is absolutely necessary? I think, so many people hear plant-based and they kind of freak out. I don't want to be a vegan, especially, given all the medical changes they're going through. So what's your technique there?
That's a really good question. And I talk about this in the book, but listen, I am like the biggest kidney patient advocate, I guess, because I've worked for them for so long. I don't want them to end up on dialysis. And so what I tell them, I give them this cheerleader speech. I was a cheerleader in high school. My husband says I was a cheerleader before I knew it, but I say, listen to me. I am here. I am your partner in this. I don't want you on dialysis. And so if you will just do what I'm telling you to do, I'm pretty sure I can keep you off. At least I know I can extend the time before you go on. And here's the thing. If you go on dialysis, you're going to be on a restrictive diet. So do you want dialysis in a restrictive diet, or do you just want to change your diet? And think about, then I was talking about, think about all the wonderful things in the plant kingdom. Like, with meat, I mean, what have you got? Like chicken, ham, turkey, pork. But think about the variety. And when I began to eat plant-based, I mean, think about like all the different fruits: blueberries, strawberries, peaches, grapes, apples. Think about the vegetables. You've got squash, you've got greens, you've got root vegetables, beets, all these things. And really the variety of taste, using different herbs there's so many. This is why I would love, if you're going to move into this space, like, get connected to the plant-based world. So like the Forks Over Knives has like different recipes. There's another one, Oshi Glows, has these amazing recipes. Trying to think. Oh, the PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, has this 21-day vegan kickstart that will spoon feed you recipes and support. So there's so many ways, but you've really got to just show them, hey, I'm here to help you. What I'm telling you right now, I'm trying to keep you off dialysis. Let's be on a team. Let's partner together. Let's get this done. So that's what I do.
Yeah, I think it's so important. So many times patients just need a little confidence booster and a little cheerleader. So I think that's great. And someone's asking if you have recipes in the book.
I don't, but I want to update the book and get recipes in there. But really, there's so many recipe books out there, and just this plant-based, like the China study. Actually, you know what? I'll send Megan. I'll email you. I don't know if maybe you can put it up when you post this, but there's so many great cookbooks out there, like the China study cookbook, Forks Over Knives Family. There's so many out there, just plant-based. Which is the majority of these patients are just going to need plant-based. The majority of them are not going to have a potassium restriction. And so they could really go to any of those books. But I also find, unfortunately, people don't cook a lot nowadays. Sometimes they do. But so I also try to keep things simple. And when I redo this and put recipes in here, all those recipes would have to be super simple, because that's what people want. They don't want anything real complicated. So
yes, I agree.
But I do want to update it with some recipes, but there's so many other cookbooks out there that I didn't on this one.
Yeah, well, I mean, opportunities for the future. I think everyone would be looking forward to that. So I guess with that, that's kind of all the questions, but thank you so much, everyone. Be on the lookout for an email from me with all of your materials and recordings and everything. And Jennifer, thank you so much for your time. This was great.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank y'all all.